Thanks everybody for signing in on time. I'm sure we'll have some more people coming in, but we got a busy meeting, so we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Joe Brothman. I'm the Orange County Chapter President. I'll be walking you through today's meeting. So we have our agenda up. Today we're going to just do our welcome and introductions as always. We'll give a chapter update. We have a really great guest, Stephen Call from Washington State University, is going to give a hospital facility cost benchmarking presentation. Really excited for that. We have, again, as always, our industry update, member update, and then we'll get into some exciting events we got going on for this chapter. Also, I think this might be, Andrini, correct me if I'm incorrect, the last only digital meeting, so it's kind of special.
Yeah, cross your finger, guys.
Cross our fingers. Whenever we say that, there's like a new wave that comes along, so
Yes.
hopefully we didn't knock on Pandora's box. And want to also thank our gold and silver sponsors. They make the chapter meetings possible for all the chapters. There's way too many to name out here, but we have this great couple slides. Really do want to call them out as first, thank you for sponsoring all of the education and making this possible, but also promoting. If you're interested in being a gold or silver sponsor, please reach out to the state office. There's special benefits to that, as well as knowing that you support all the great education activities that CSHE offers. So again, thanks to all of our sponsors, especially the gold and silver. Also, just awareness, our state leaders. One of them here, our own chapter member, Mr. Chambers, is our state vice president. We also have here our local chapter leaders. Myself, I'm the chapter president, Joe Brothman. I'm the director of facilities, EHS, and emergency management at UCI Health. I'll let Andrini introduce herself.
Hi guys, my name is Andrini with Possible Fire Protection. I've been CC secretary for almost 5 years now. Wow. So welcome everyone.
Half a decade, nice. Calvin?
I'm Calvin Fakma. I am your vice president for Orange County chapter, and I'm currently at Chalk Children's as the director of support services.
And Calvin, super aware that you're going through a little bit of a situation. Do you want to sign off, or are you okay to maybe give just the next one and then you can do what you need to do?
Yeah, I'll stay on as long as I can.
Okay, I'll turn it over to you here.
All right. One sec. Joe, do we have state updates? Sorry, I'm not.
You know, I think the only big state update we have is our annual institute is scheduled. The announcement went out. Beth sent that out, and I actually have a slide on it. So I think the only I'll take care of it, Calvin. Sorry, throw you off the spot.
Not prepared.
No, you got a lot going on. It's okay. That happens to me too. You know, I think the big thing for this slide anyway is just to remember, just register for CSHE. If you're not a member, glad to have you here. We always like to have prospective members join for a meeting or two, but also just remind you, if you are joining for all of these meetings, your membership does go a long way. It's a $50 membership that gets you a lot of information. And now that we're going to have in-person meetings, it'll be required for the in-person. The big updates, we got our golf event scheduled. So the 28th of June, we are going to be hosting our, what is it now, the third Orange County chapter golf tournament at Black Gold. Again, we had a really great time last time. Travis is going to be, or is the tour chair. And I'm not sure if Travis is on. I know he just started a new position, so he's probably really busy, but I see you on there, Travis. Do you want to give an update to anybody or anything going on with the golf tournament?
Sure. Yeah, I've been working with Beth. We're almost done with the flyer. I anticipate it being posted and distributed next week, which will give us 3 full months to get all the positions filled, logged, and I'm really looking forward to this event and getting out and spending some time with all the members. We've been kind of cooped up for so long. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Right on, and thanks for all your work scheduling and getting this organized. I know Travis is now the facility director at Garden Grove Hospital, correct?
Yes, sir. Garden Grove and
Congratulations. It's excellent. Really couldn't be happier for you. They got a great person running those programs, and we're really happy to have you host our golf tournament too. So thank you.
thanks,
More
Joe.
information to come with that. And then the other big announcement, the annual institute. So this has been now over 2 years in the making because we've had to push it back now twice. So really hopeful now on same month, so June, the beginning of the month, the 1st through the 3rd. It'll be at the resort at Squaw Creek in Olympic Valley at Lake Tahoe. Beth, you're on. Anything that you want to give to the group? I know that lots of information is available on the brochure that's been sent out.
Most everything should be available on the brochure. If you have any questions about exhibiting or you need help registering, feel free to give me a call anytime. My number is on all of the materials. Mostly just get out there and register. We want to see you there.
Well said. Yeah, it's Travis said we've all been cooped up for a long time. It's going to be great to connect with everyone from across the state, and really looking forward to having a great event. I know a lot of the material being covered is super timely, super applicable. We have members from HCI there, Joint Commission, lots of really great speakers, panel going to give COVID experiences, so it'll be a lot of fun. And Beth, thank you for all you're doing to coordinate that. Next, we want to make sure everyone is aware of the Robert Mack Scholarship Foundation. The link up there rolls off the tip of your tongue there. You can see it kind of flashing. That's the website for now. From my understanding, they are making a more pretty URL. But just so everyone's aware, 1983, the CSHE began discussions of creating a scholarship foundation for those interested in pursuing fields of study that are in the facility engineering, biomedical engineering, architecture, mechanical or electrical engineering, or construction management in the healthcare field. To date, the Robert Mack Scholarship Foundation has given out about $180,000 worth of continuing education dollars to prospective students. If you are interested, go to this website. You're able to apply for a scholarship if you're pursuing any of those endeavors. And now we do have our education presentation. So really excited. Stephen Call is an assistant professor at the Washington State University. We also have there, when this gets sent out and made available, this PowerPoint, you can click on that link and see all the articles and papers that he has been cited in and published. So wide array of information that's applicable to hospital facility managers. A very wise and interesting presentation today was given at one of our other chapters that I had the pleasure of joining, and thought it would be great information for our chapter. So Stephen, I'm gonna stop sharing and I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Joe, for the introduction and the opportunity to be here. I'm going to share my screen now. It's a nice little transition. Let's see. I'm going to start. Okay. Hopefully you can all see that. Joe, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen? Okay, perfect. Awesome. Okay, well, thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. I'd like to keep this fairly informal. I know this is a Zoom conference, and so most of you are kind of have one eye on the presentation, another eye on something else going on. So, but I would encourage you, if you want to submit something via the chat feature, or just speak up any point in the presentation. I love to kind of keep the questions going. This I believe is very applicable to most of you as far as your roles managing hospitals and other healthcare facilities. And so I would love the questions. If you want to save it to the end, that's great too. But as was mentioned, I am a professor at Washington State University. I'm also part of something called the Simplar Foundation, which is a group of researchers that have gotten together to kind of combine our efforts in the world of the built environment, specifically in the world of facilities management. Most universities don't have a dedicated department for facilities management. And those that do many times don't necessarily have research faculty on staff. And so a group of us have formed this foundation, faculty at Arizona State, UNC Charlotte, Washington State, and Texas A&M, and some others. So if you ever see that logo, you'll know where that came from. But I actually started my career in healthcare in Texas Children's Hospital in Houston. I was a maintenance supervisor, oversaw the pneumatic tube shop and the control room and things like that, and was actually director of facilities for a medical center in the Champaign-Urbana area of Illinois. So what we're talking about today isn't just abstract for me. It's not just academic. I've been there. I've experienced the challenges that healthcare facilities are facing, and so I always have that perspective when I do my research and I write on these various topics. My goal is always how is this research actually going to help? You know, can the typical facility manager take this information and actually make an impact in what they're doing? So that's always my perspective. I'm really one of the only, if not the only, faculty in the country that focuses their program entirely on healthcare facility operations. So as Joe mentioned, I do have a lot of different topics I cover: workforce succession planning, benchmarking, training, et cetera, in the world of healthcare FM. So if you ever have any questions about any topic, there's my email, and I would love to hear from you. Love to make contacts as I work and do different research projects. So why on earth do I focus on healthcare? I don't probably have to preach to this choir because you were all in healthcare, but sometimes I do presentations at IFMA, for example, and not everybody's in this world, but it's one of the largest, as you know, one of the largest industries in the US. So approximately $4 trillion in annual spending, 40 billion in annual construction spending on average. It's also one of the fastest growing industries in the US. So 15% job growth projected through 2029, 2.4 million new jobs. So why am I showing this slide is to really reinforce the idea that it's a big industry, it's a growing industry. So when there's problems within healthcare, they're big problems and they continue to get bigger. So that's why I love kind of working in this area, because really there's a lot of opportunities to help create solutions for some of the challenges we're all facing. And most facility managers are so busy just dealing with the day-to-day things that it's nice to hopefully have someone that can take a look and has the time to kind of dig a little deeper on some of these issues. And hopefully that's my goal. So Deloitte did a study several years ago, and the question from the study was, what concerns are keeping hospital administrators up at night? That's what Deloitte was really trying to understand. What are these big issues that are keeping administrators up at night? Because ultimately, these concerns are going to be important to facility managers to understand as well, because that trickle-down effect. So what Deloitte discovered is the top concerns are these. Number one is changing Medicaid reimbursements, transition to value-based care. Number three is improving margins. And number four is recruiting and retaining competent leaders. So what we're going to talk about today is really this issue of improving margins and how that's affecting the world of facilities management and construction. I also do a lot of research in the world of succession planning, recruitment, and employee retention, but we won't talk about that today, but that's definitely another really important topic. So we know that this idea of improving margins is one of the top three concerns for hospital administrators. So a little quick tutorial on profit margin. So the only way to improve profit margin is to pull one of two levers, either increasing sales, or in healthcare, you could think about increasing, services, which is not always easy. So increasing sales, or the other lever we can administrators can pull is decreasing operating expenses. So quickly we can all realize what lever hospital administrators are going to be pulling that's going to affect facility management. Because of this, healthcare facility managers, the feedback I constantly get as I meet with facility managers in healthcare and discuss this issue of budgets and staffing levels, is that there's a pressure that's being felt to not only reduce operating expenses, but still maintain facility program performance. So that's the constant pressure that hospital facility managers are feeling, because again, one of the top 3 things that are keeping their administrator up at night is, how am I improving profit margins? We all know that facilities are a primary target for this because it's one of the largest cost centers in the hospital. So if you think about a administrator is up at night at 2 a.m. and thinking, how can I, increase sales, and how can I reduce operating expenses? Well, primary target, facilities, because of the huge cost. And it's typically not revenue generating unless, you dabble in the world of real estate and maybe you have some spaces that you can rent out, et cetera. But primarily it's a cost center. Here are some of the various cost centers. When I say facilities, I'm talking plant operations, EVS, laundry, linen, dietary, safety, security, transportation, clinical engineering, right? Whether or not you have many of you may have direct oversight of these various cost centers. Maybe you have a couple, but the world of facilities, it's a cost. It's a cost to manage. So the question is, how then? We're feeling this pressure. It's a top issue. Facilities is a major target for trying to reduce expenses, and a lot of us are feeling that pressure. Not only so it's almost a battle every year. The feedback I get, it's almost a battle every year just to maintain what you have. So how can facility managers in hospitals and other healthcare organizations effectively manage this increasing pressure to do more with less? So the solution, in my opinion, is really making the business case. So why do I need these resources to deliver on expectations? There's really 2 pieces of this. There's the qualitative piece and the quantitative piece. We're going to talk a lot about the quantitative piece here in a minute. But still, this is really important to recognize that there is some qualitative aspect of developing your business case to try to justify your budgets, for example. And that qualitative piece is really about telling the story about facilities and its impact to the quality of the healthcare experience for patients and for staff. So an example of this is funds spent on landscaping maintenance for the hospital entrance or improving curb appeal, and how that has a direct impact on patient satisfaction or loyalty scores. Has anybody ever looked at that? That's something that could be a qualitative metric that could say, look, the money we're spending on some of these things to improve brand and improve curb appeal, it's really has a direct impact to our patient satisfaction. Another example would be money spent on staff training actually improves employee satisfaction. Have any of you looked into that to say, hey, I'm constantly, battling this $2,000 of staff training budget I have, and I'm constantly trying to justify it. Instead of, one way to justify that is to say, look, there's a direct connection to employee satisfaction or employee retention rates. So those are some of the things that can be looked at, qualitative data points or qualitative metrics that can really help justify the need for these various resources. Now, the other part of this is the quantitative, which we're going to talk the rest of the conversation is really about the qualitative impact directly to the finances of the healthcare business. So we all know that managing facilities is a cost. It's a cost of doing business. Nobody's going to argue that you don't need a budget at all. So it's really a matter of justifying why that cost is necessary. In a perfect world, which is never the case in healthcare, is measuring your work demand. So justifying your cost based upon the corrective work order demands and the time it's taking you to do your preventative maintenance via your CMMS system. And it should be able to calculate the total work demand for your hospital, right? You take the amount of average corrective hours you're getting every year, every month. You add that to your preventative work. You should say, to run this hospital successfully, it takes X number of hours, and you multiply that by the hourly rate, et cetera. That's the money you need. Very difficult to do. It takes a lot of time. It takes almost an entire team of CMMS administrators to do that. But in a perfect world, that's really what you could do to justify your budget. And then if administrator comes and says, look, we need to reduce this cost center by 10%, then you could quickly use that and say, well, that loss, that reduction in my operating budget is going to create downtime, or it's going to create issues with deferred maintenance. And this is the cost, right? This directly, immediately, that's the impact to the business. Very difficult to do. So what I constantly talk about is the need to benchmark. So that's a lot of heavy lifting. A starting point with all this is benchmarking. It's quick, it's easy, and it's a great way to say, hey, look, I've got some data, I've got some justification of why my budget, why my FTE level is what it is, and we need that based on the standard the standard facility staffing throughout the country, et cetera. So the key to starting the steps towards benchmarking is simply, number one, developing and measuring internal processes and standards. So internally benchmarking, for example, is important, because if you can't identify costs by facility, for example, you just simply can't internally benchmark, and you can't externally benchmark. So an example of this is making sure that your accounting system is actually breaking out costs by facilities. So can your accounting system produce that? Can you say, how much is my EVS expense per hospital? Because you can't compare hospitals if you don't have that accounting information. So looking into those sort of things and making sure that you can measure those standards internally. Another one is making sure that you're comparing job descriptions, as an example. So maybe in one hospital internally, you combine laundry and EVS, and another hospital you have separate laundry and separate EVS staff, right? And so you're not able to compare apples to apples. So making sure that internally you can compare different hospitals or different facilities or different cost centers based on what you're looking for. Once you have that established, then you can start looking at external benchmarking. So not only am I looking hospital by hospital within my own system, but now I'm curious to know how other hospitals are comparing to me and looking externally. And we'll talk a little bit about that here soon, about those external benchmarks that are available to do that. Once you are comparing internally, you're comparing externally, you're able to identify performance gaps to say, interesting, per square foot, I'm a little bit low on my engineering staff compared to external peers. So why is that? There may be a very good reason for that. There may not be a good reason for that, but at least identify some gaps. And then once you dig a little deeper, analyze it, understand it, you can start to initiate and manage performance improvements. So those are the kind of the 4 key steps, or the 4 framework for benchmarking. So typically I can't see any, if everybody raised their hands, I couldn't see it, most of you anyway. So a lot of times when I do this in person, I say, who here believes benchmarking is important? Most facility managers will raise their hands and say, yes, it is important. But very few hospitals actually benchmark. And those that do, almost all of them say they'll benchmark internally, but they don't benchmark externally. And so why is the big question? Why, if healthcare facility managers believe benchmarking is really important, why is nobody doing it? Well, first of all, I want to recognize why that is in many points, because there are some factors. Primarily, existing benchmarks are dated, they're difficult to interpret, and they're not very comprehensive. So, for example, the benchmark that most of us are familiar with is in 2010, ASHI-IFMA published a operations and maintenance benchmark for healthcare facilities. This is over 12 years old. And the only metrics that they're looking at are gross square footage and adjusted patient days. So it's old. And when I say difficult to interpret, I like to read this word for word. So adjusted patient days. Adjusted patient days is calculated by dividing total charges by inpatient charges, then multiplying by the number of inpatient days, admissions, gross revenue divided by inpatient revenue times inpatient patient days equals adjusted patient days. So if I'm looking at this, I could maybe figure that out eventually, but that's super confusing. So automatically I'm turned off by this because it's not something that's I can't easily calculate it, or it's not intuitive to me to be able to produce the numbers that I would like to get. So difficult to interpret, no facility salary compensation data. So for example, these reports will tell you, oh, I think, based on your square footage, this should be your number of engineering employees, but I have no idea, I have no way to compare the compensation data. So what happens if my hospital, my contract, my professional services are really low because I have more inpatient or in-house staff? It just makes my numbers look bad. So I'm reluctant to benchmark because I feel, or rightly or wrongly, that I'm not comparing apples to apples because I can't look at compensation data. The other thing I will mention is IBM Action OI is a benchmark that many of you have probably seen, and that typically comes from the finance department when the finance group is doing a big benchmarking study. I will tell you, I did a big benchmarking report for the VA system, and I've looked at IBM Action OI and other benchmarking reports. I don't know what's going on with that data set, but it is. I know I'm being recorded, but be extremely skeptical about the benchmarks that you're getting if you are being compared to Action OI. I will tell you, if you're getting a report from most external groups that are looking at your benchmark, it's coming from this, and it's going to probably, my experience is about 50% lower than other benchmarks that are out there in the industry. So just bringing that to your attention, because that's kind of a landmine that you might be walking into. So if you're not prepared, and that's kind of the goal of what I'm doing, is if you're getting this data from your finance department, for example, that says, look, you've got 10 facility engineers, and our benchmarks say you should have 6. And you're saying, look, I'm barely surviving as it is. I feel like we're overwhelmed, but you have nothing to push. You have no data to justify that. This is what you can now do, because FYI, IFMA came out with a new report in 2020. Very few are aware of this, which is poor marketing on the behalf of IFMA. I've actually told them that, but that's kind of what I like to do, is say, look, there's benchmark reports out there. I was an advisor on this report. It's fairly comprehensive. It's fairly easy to use. It still doesn't compare compensation data, but it's a good place to start. So that's good news for everybody. There's benchmarking reports out there that are available. I do use that report when I do support organizations and doing benchmarking. I have some proprietary data that also helps with kind of looking at compensation. So if you ever want any assistance with that or have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. But now you're not stranded on an island if you're getting pressure from finance, and you have some resources, hopefully, to now benchmark and push back a little bit. So still, there are some limitations to benchmarking, and I want to make sure that I recognize this as well. There's something we call peer comparison equivalence. So it's like, I'm a rural hospital and I'm being compared to a lot of urban systems, so that's not really fair. Or I have a lot of outpatient facilities and I'm being compared to hospital occupancy, and so that's not fair. So there are some times when it's not a perfect comparison. Ratiometric comparison equivalence is an example of different measurement standards for building area, as an example. So if we all took a tape measure and measured the same room, we'd all come up with some different results. So the metrics or the measurements aren't always perfect. There's limited insight into factors contributing to peer performance. So for example, how do I know that my benchmark saying I should be 10 FTEs and I'm 15, but how do I know that everybody from that source or the benchmarking data isn't outsourcing all their employees? That's not really a fair apples to apples comparison. my staff is doing construction management in addition to facilities engineering. And so, right. So it's not always a perfect peer comparison. You don't always know the structure of organizations that you're comparing against. And if the best practice is, it may be invalid if overall industry is facing similar challenges. So if staffing levels, if there's a workforce shortage in skilled workforce, for example, and the benchmark saying this, well, it's probably a little low just because the overall industry may be facing similar challenges. And then self-reporting. At the end of the day, most of this benchmarking data is coming from survey information. And so you're kind of relying on the accuracy of the person that's filling out the survey. So yes, there are limitations to benchmarking. There are a lot of reasons why many people are reluctant to do benchmarking. But what I say is it's your goal with benchmarking is primarily to make sure, hey, I'm in the ballpark. And it's a tool to then identify areas for improvement and to justify budgets. So yes, there are limitations and those need to be recognized, but please don't ignore the value that can come from benchmarking. Some are afraid to say, what if I benchmark, and I show that I'm overstaffed, for example. That's, I don't want to know what I just don't want to know because I don't have to deal with it. Well, I think it shows a lot of value if you were to approach your CFO and say, look, I went ahead and benchmarked, I'm showing a little bit high, but these are the reasons why I'm a little bit high. And I'm sure, I think it creates a lot of trust and capital within your organization to say, this individual understands the business of facilities. They're going through best practices. They're identifying where they can improve. I think it adds a lot of value. So it's not just a matter of reactive, right? Just reacting when we're feeling pressure. We should be fairly proactive in benchmarking. So the traditional approach to benchmarking is gross square footage as a metric. So for example, facility expense per gross square foot. So on average, hospitals spend, this is a fairly, it varies, right, geographically, but $2 a square foot on electricity. So so the ratio for that is 2 to 1. So for every 1 square foot in a hospital, there's $2 spent on electricity. That's the typical approach. So if there was a perfect correlation, it would be if every hospital spent $2 per 1 square foot. But there are other factors that affect the hospital's electricity expense. So even though that's the average, right? Average is $2. We all know that there's a lot of other factors that contribute to electricity expense. The location of your facility, the infrastructure, age of your facility, what different types of equipment, the climate, the utility that you're working with, right? There's a lot of other factors. So even though that's an average, none of us would say that's a perfect correlation. And so the question I have, so that's been the traditional approach to benchmarking. They just take a bunch of surveys, they average those numbers together and say, okay, on average, $2 a square foot, and we all kind of accept that. But my question is, how do we know that gross square footage is an accurate metric? So the joke or that I try to say is, well, how do we know that the number of pine trees in your parking lot doesn't have the same effect as gross square footage? We've picked that. Has anybody ever looked to see that statistically there's a correlation between gross square footage and facility costs? Well, nobody's ever looked at that before, but that's part of this research, which is quite fascinating. So the research was to say, is there better metrics other than gross square footage to determine facility expenses that hold its ratio irrespective of other factors? In healthcare especially, there's been historically, especially in office and business environments, gross square footage is kind of the standard metric. In hospitals, we're very reluctant to say, there's so many other factors besides gross square footage. We don't feel like that's a fair metric. And so, we publish this thing called adjusted patient days that somehow makes it better. How do you know? We don't know. So what I was looking into to say, okay, how can I prove that one metric over another is a better metric? Is gross square footage the best metric? Is pine trees in your parking lot the best metric? What is it? So quick tutorial on statistics. So you'll see this blue line, right? And you'll see a couple dots along the blue line. So the closer to that blue, the dots are the data points. So you can think of this as 3, 4, like 8 different hospitals. And let's say this is electricity expense. And that's a 2-to-1 line, raising it a 2-to-1 ratio. So if those dots landed exactly on that blue line, that would be a perfect correlation. And if it landed on that line, it would actually be considered a correlation coefficient of 1. So no matter what we're saying is, regardless of location, regardless of age, regardless of anything, if you have a perfect correlation or a correlation coefficient of 1, there are no other factors besides gross square footage that affect that. But it's very rare to do that. And so we say, this is a fairly positive correlation. It's not perfect, but the closer we can get to 1, the more perfect it is. And so what I did is I reviewed the information provided by each state's Department of Health. I looked at utilization reports, looked at financial statements, and tried to see if there was a correlation between utilization metrics and facility operating costs. So the different utilization metrics that I looked at were admissions, discharges, available and licensed beds, patient days, gross square footage, and something on the financial sheet called plant, property, and equipment, or PP&E values. You might be curious to know that most hospitals report, these various metrics. Gross square footage was quite limited because it's not a publicly available metric many times. It's typically just information that's used internally. But I looked at those metrics and those hospital costs to verify, number 1, if gross square footage was a sound metric for benchmarking, 2, explore strengths of other metrics, and then 3, try to see if there was a breakout by large and small hospitals. So this is the result. Hopefully you can see the screen. But what this is showing is at the top, those are the metrics: available beds, patient days, admissions, gross square footage, and PP&E. Those are the metrics. And on the top row, and the column to the left is the costs, or the cost accounts. So total plant operating expense, and it has the total plant operating expense rolls up into some costs, some sub costs, right? Maintenance, utilities, salary, wages, and benefits, depreciation, and other. So what this is saying is, if you think of 1.0 being a perfect correlation, if you know the gross square footage of a hospital, it has a correlation strength of 0.79, which is actually quite strong. Because if you go back to this, anything above 0.5 is considered a strong correlation. Anything below 0.5 is considered a weak correlation, and 0 is like there's no correlation at all. It's just total chaos. So, so what these numbers are telling us is that really, if you use any of these metrics, it's a pretty strong metric. It's a pretty strong correlation to costs. You'll also notice something interesting, which has never been looked at before, except in this research. And because of this, IFMA actually put this metric in their new 2020 benchmark report, is plant, property, and equipment values. So the strongest correlation to plant operating expenses is actually PP&E values. And this is specific to large hospitals, by the way. You can also see down here housekeeping expenses. So really strong amongst all metrics as well. And if you wanted, you can break these out. Look, I only want to know what my compensation expense should be. Really what it's saying is, again, PP&E values are very strong, very strong correlation to your compensation expense. So another way to look at this is 0.85. So there's only about 15% of whatever your compensation expense is. There's only about 15% of other things besides PP&E that relate, that connect with your compensation. So you can be kind of an 85% confidence level that you're at benchmark if you're comparing to PP&E values, versus gross square footage, which you're saying, I'm only about 60% confident that my compensation benchmarks, if I'm looking at gross square footage, is accurate. Now, what's really curious is small hospitals. So when I define small hospitals as any hospital less than 100,000 square feet. That's how I broke that out. What's really interesting is then now, if you look at the metrics across the board, available beds is actually a weak metric. Patient days is extremely weak metric. And interestingly enough, that was the 2010 metric, right? Adjusted patient days, which is saying you might as well say number of pine trees in your parking lot, because the patient days has nothing to do with plant operating expenses. Admissions is strong and gross square footage is weak. So this was a really important finding in this, to say, if you are a small hospital and you're using gross square footage as your benchmarking metric, you're taking a stab in the dark, because there's no correlation between gross square footage, patient days, or available beds. The only two metrics that hold are admissions and plant property and equipment. So the key findings in this report, as I mentioned, is gross square foot, regardless of size, is actually an unreliable metric for hospital facility cost benchmarking. Now, if you're only looking at large hospitals, yeah, it's good. But if you're just saying, look, I don't care, large, small, medium, gross square foot is not really the best metric. The best metrics for healthcare benchmarking are plant property and equipment and admissions. And I want to make note that when I say plant property and equipment values, I'm actually talking about the gross plant property and equipment. If you look at your balance sheet, you'll also know that you'll see a net plant property and equipment. Net PP&E is actually including it's being reduced by your annual depreciation. So you're only going to want to look at gross if you're trying to compare your benchmarking. I'll take a breather here for a second, and I'll see if there's any questions. Then I'm going to kind of show you some of the ratios and have you actually, we'll spend a couple minutes and try to kind of calculate them and see what you guys and ladies think about the results. But any questions at this point about this research?
Applicable to single building hospitals or medical campuses, or like mixed bags, so to speak?
Yeah, so this data is really primarily medical center. When I say it's a combination of inpatient spaces and outpatient spaces, so it's not just like standalone hospitals that were evaluated. So that's if you're just looking at, I only want to look at outpatient, you should probably be comparing these metrics along with what I will say just standard office metrics as well. There's no silver bullet when you're doing benchmarking. And so the more variety you can have to kind of see how it lays out is, I think, really powerful. And almost always you're going to find that there's a midpoint, right? You're like, oh, I got a couple outliers, but 5 out of the 6 utilization metrics are all falling within this range. So you can, with a lot of confidence, you can say, okay, this is about where I should be. So you kind of have to be a little creative depending on the structure of your organization. For example, I supported a hospital in Colorado and doing some benchmarking. They had a lot of square footage, but they were primarily outpatient. And so looking at admissions and looking at beds, for example, was a very poor metric for them. It looked, because it wasn't fair. So that's why plant property and equipment, in my opinion, is a very strong metric, because it's a metric that's managed through GAAP rules. And so you can have a really high confidence level that it's a reliable number, and it's accounting for land, equipment, and buildings. So that's one reason why I think it's such a strong metric. Sorry, hope that answered your question, Joe. I'm happy to expound if you have any.
No, yeah, it did. I think sometimes the question comes up, how is this building compared to this one? And if it's like a medical office building versus an ambulatory care center versus a laboratory, it's really hard to answer that question.
Yeah, and I get that question a lot when I'm helping systems with benchmarking. And again, what I stress is, look, this is a really easy, quick, now relatively easy, right? I mean, it takes a few hours to kind of crunch the numbers and analyze things. So you got to be a little skeptical healthy skepticism. I mean, but at least it's somewhere, right? To kind of see where you're at. You're not going to consider that the be all end all as far as what those numbers come out with. But it's a really good, really reliable, quick way to kind of make sure that you're in the ballpark. And if you're 50% off, then you're probably saying, okay, I can handle 10, 20% off of these benchmarks, but why am I 100% off? That's really what these will do for you. What I've also found is those, when we're looking just at, for example, clinics, right? When hospitals systems come to me and say, look, we want to benchmark. We've got 30 clinics that are spread out geographically, but is that fair to use these benchmarks? What I found is those numbers are holding up fairly true. So it's definitely worth looking at.
Stephen, this is Gary. Really appreciate that your study looking at the PP&E. Did you guys get more refined? And I'm assuming your presentation might get here. The PP&E being an appropriate metric, did you get into the intensity factors or what I would call like design or age of equipment that then further take you into where those numbers can be skewed for a facility?
Yeah, so the good news, and so no, Gary, we didn't do adjustments, right? To say, well, PP and making some adjustments based on age. Like that's where I was really trying to say, is there a metric where we don't have to do that, right? We don't have to say adjusted patient days. We can just say PP&E. This is my opinion, why I think PP&E is such a strong metric is because, as you know, as far as accounting, as that capital improvements are continually being added to that PP&E total. So as the facility ages, what it actually does is that gross amount, it keeps the original, plus it keeps adding on. So in some ways it counteracts the issue with, oh, it's not fair because, you know, my buildings are 50 years old. I'm looking at the original value. Well, yep. No, because it's over the last 50 years, you've kept dumping capital improvements into that PP&E amount. So that's why the gross PP&E, in my opinion, is such a strong metric. It's saying that regardless of age, regardless of anything, it consistently holds its relevance to benchmarking. So that's my opinion.
Thank you.
Yeah. That's why net PP&E, by the way, is not a good metric because it's continually being dropped through depreciation over time. It's really key to look at that gross number.
Well, it's been my experience that there's some facilities, depending upon their location and their resources, that they've got some really bad, even though you would track a metric by PP&E, they've got some really bad design over the years. They didn't spend good money on that. And so their metrics are significantly off compared to other facilities.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, as I mentioned, there's always going to be, you know, some, what I love about this benchmark is look, this is the standard. And if you see there's some huge swings of, you yep. can say, well, that's probably why, because of this, right? And that's what it does for you. It allows you to at least have a starting point to identify why it is what it is, and then what you can do to address it. So that would be an example where you say, look, we need to spend some money on some capital improvements to fix these design issues, which would then bump up, because the capital we're dumping back into these facilities is going to bump up our PP&E values, which would then grow our benchmark for operating expenses.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I'll jump into this real quickly. So this is an example of the simplicity, but the beauty of the research is saying, this is the number, right? It's saying if you want to use gross square footage as your metric, you'd say, okay, for every 1 square foot I should be spending $21.81 on total plant operating expenses. It's that simple. So if you know what your gross square footage is, you multiply it by 2181. That's your number. If you're looking at plant, property, and equipment, which again is these, you'll notice these asterisks. That means that these are the strongest correlations, regardless of your size of your facility. You're saying for every 1 admission I have annually, by the way, these are annual expenses. For every 1 admission I have annually, I should be spending about $1,217 is my total plant operating expenses. plant PP&E values, which by the way, I know 99% of you are not going to have offhand. It's really simple to get. Just email your accountant friend and say, what's our PPE value on our balance sheet? They'll know exactly what you're talking about. They'll send it to you. But again, you need to clarify, I want gross PP&E. And they'll probably ask you, why are you asking? That's why, what do you want to know? But that's the number. And you can write this down. This is, and by the way, this is total. I didn't show the breakout because I didn't want to get confusing, but it's 0.036 for every $1 of PP&E you have on your balance sheet. So what I'd like to do, give everybody maybe 30 seconds. This is an easy one, because you probably all know, pick one hospital or one medical center. And again, this is cost center. So when I say cost center, typically it's a medical center, right? You're going to have a hospital, you're going to have a couple clinics or whatever, but just for the fun of it, if you know what your gross square footage is of your medical center, multiply it by 2181, and that should be your annual, that's the benchmark. That's the benchmark. If you have any feedback about that, or like, wow, that's right on, or that's way off, let's chat, but that's how it works. Any questions on this before I move on to the next slide? And by the way, that total operating expense has various roll-up costs, right? So it's including utilities, compensation, depreciation, purchase services. Okay, so you can use this ratio model to justify your facility expense. So when you're going through your annual budget and you're saying, hey, I should have, in my purchase services, it should be this, because I looked at my benchmark and I'm right, or maybe I'm right on and I'm happy with that, right? Or you're getting pressure from your administration saying, we've got to cut FTEs. You can say, look, this is, you can do that, but it's gonna be below the national standard, and I would like to think that our organization is at least trying to stay competitive with, maybe we don't need to be top tier, but we at least should be doing what an average hospital would be doing. I also want specifically all the architects or contractors on the call that may have been lulled to sleep about operating expenses. This is really practical for you as well, because what this can do is it can actually predict future facility operating expenses based on planned construction. So on the balance sheet, whenever you spend money on a construction project, that money gets dumped into something called construction work in progress, which is a section of the balance sheet. All CWIP is PP&E that just isn't in service yet. So once you get your occupancy permit, that CWIP number moves into PP&E. So you can use those same metrics for construction work in progress. So as a contractor or as an architect or an engineer, for example, if you're doing value engineering, you can say, look, we just, we found a way to cut out, I don't know, this air handler that we thought we needed, but now we don't. And we just saved, $100,000 of capital. Well, not only can you say how much capital we just saved, but now you can say, and by the way, we just saved you X number of dollars every single year in operating expenses. So what a really powerful tool. The flip side of that is for facility managers that can say, hey, we're building a new building and I'm a little nervous that I don't have the commitment to grow my staff sufficiently, or I don't have the utility budget, whatever. Right? A lot of times it's after the fact, finance will come and say, hey, here's your budget. The building, the building's running, here's your budget. And you're like, whoa, that's not even in the realm of reality sometimes. So you can get ahead of the game, right? Hopefully you're part of that conversation in the pre-planning phase, and you can say, you can even kind of put a pause and say, before we even approve this extension or this expansion, we need to be talking about how it's going to impact operating expenses. So really, really powerful tool that can benefit the whole, facility and construction team. So we kind of already did this as far as practicing that works. But in conclusion, how can healthcare facility leaders effectively manage increasing pressure to do more with less? Just benchmark. Step one, benchmark. Gather some existing facility costs, start comparing internally first, if you like, looking at external data. It's an easy way to provide some real evidence to support whatever recommendations or initiatives that you're needing to have an effective and efficient facilities program. So thank you very much for the chance to speak to you all today. And I'd love to have any questions at this point, if you have any.
Thank you so much, Stephen. It's always like, it's amazing when you see some of these things, because I'm a big, or I should say our organization's a big Action OY proponent. And I'm always seems like I'm, arguing with them that this can't be real, and, this helps tremendously because it does give us a little kind of tools in our toolkit to go back to that table and say, here's maybe something that we should be looking at as a realistic benchmarking tool, because I've spent many hours just whining about that and trying to convey the realities with our finance team. So this is really helpful.
Well, good. That's my goal, is to, again, provide some tools or information that can really impact what you all do on a daily basis. And consider me a resource. Again, my entire program, my consulting efforts are all in healthcare facility operations. So that's my email. Would love to connect with anybody or have a conversation, and just appreciate the opportunity.
Great. Well, thanks so much. And
Could I add a comment, Joe? This is Gary. Every CFO I've ever worked with at numerous hospital institutions. Thank you so much, Steve. You really just nailed this. And all the CFOs always said, well, come with a better metric. And they loved their metrics because their metrics would just reduce the bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
And it was never a fair metric to what it really takes to make sure that our hospitals were running safely and appropriately and appropriate patient care. And they say, well, come with a better metric. And us as facility engineers, quite often we're not well prepared for coming with a better metric. And it was just like you even mentioned about getting rid of the air handler. Well, that's going to reduce some costs. I'd say there's a lot of CFOs would be like, well, yeah, get rid of the air handler. My construction costs go low and my maintenance costs go low. And you're sitting there trying to have the argument about the staff that it's going to take to maintain it. And they're on a whole nother plane about reducing construction and the operation costs. So I think you really helped nail it, being able to recognize that these metrics are very important for facilities to be able to track in order to be able to manage up to the C-suite and get the appropriate resources. So we're doing the right thing for patient care.
Yeah. Excellent. Yes. Thanks, Gary, for that.
Okay. Well, Stephen's presentation is going to be available on our PowerPoint here. This is all recorded. So, I suggest you all go back and re-listen, before your finance team meeting, which I'm going to do here. It's all coming up to budget season if you're on the fiscal calendar. So we thought this would really help everyone out. And Stephen, thanks so much. I'm sure you're probably going to get some calls here to help us out. I was texting a couple people being like, I'm considering this. So
yeah,
really appreciate your time here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'll go ahead and share my screen again. So give me a minute. Can everyone see my screen again? Cool, thank you. All right, so we'll jump into our industry update. Lots of information this month, lots of stuff going on. And in fact, the war in Ukraine is actually impacting our hospitals here. So this information was shared by the FBI to their stakeholders, basic information about increased cyber terrorism and cyber actors infiltrating the healthcare space. They specifically called out Russian cyber actors who are right now targeting locations to infiltrate. This flash and this link that's available on the presentation actually is a copy of the FBI flash, and it gives specific IP addresses. I think there's a couple hundred that are known Russian infiltrators. So that information was most likely known or shared with your IT professionals. We thought we would share it with this group too, because all of us here oversee critical infrastructure, which could be a target for those nefarious actors. So please check this out if you haven't already seen it. Very timely. Next link here, financing hospital energy sustainability. An article that basically goes over how hospitals can finance energy sustainability initiatives. ASHI put together many tools that facility managers can utilize to find the necessary justifications or funds for equipment, staffing, infrastructure, kind of getting into what we were just discussing. But this monograph is called Best Practices for Financing Energy Sustainability. And the specific article that you linked to was an excerpt from that white paper. Link here, Energy to Care Awards is important to celebrate when we do achieve sustainability goals and to improve our organization. Energy to Care was set up just for that reason. Many of us have dashboards and participate in the Energy to Care program. It only takes about 15 minutes to set up an account and actually create your dashboard. And it's something that, just as mentioned, we get to celebrate those successes at the awards time. So check this out. The awards are coming up. If you haven't already submitted, please do so, or not, depending on your organization's flavor. But some really great awards that get handed out. I know Kaiser always seems to take the lead in those, which is great. The annual hospital construction survey is also now available. Similar to like benchmarking reports, this information gives hospital facility directors, managers, some really great, interesting information to take back to our C-suites about what other hospitals and healthcare organizations are doing around the country in regards to construction. Some climate change articles. All of these, actually, there's a climate change response and recovery planning series on hfmmagazine.com. That's ASHI's HFM Hospital Facilities Management Magazine. So they transitioned to an e-zine for their updates. This is part of that series. So the series contains drought conditions, cold temperatures, extreme heat, and environmental equity. The latest article is on drought conditions and their challenges to hospitals. Suggest everyone, especially if you're in California, we are going to be experiencing one of the largest, or we're anticipated to experience one of the largest droughts ever in American history in the next coming years, especially in the Western states. So this article might provide useful in the coming future. Another ASHI tool, frontline staff participating in the design process. A lot of us on this call are building new facilities or remodeling. What this tool is brand new. It's to assist the design professionals in getting input from all the clinical stakeholders that might be applicable to their project. So this is an Excel spreadsheet with multiple worksheets. It goes over different areas of oversight and who should be involved in a project, and a checklist to make sure that all those important stakeholders are involved. This link, worker shortages, healthcare facilities teams, thought it was extremely appropriate for this group. I know a lot of us have been dealing with strikes or worker shortages, or during COVID when we just had a lot of people getting sick and couldn't find replacement staffing, and the Great Resignation also that was prompted by COVID. This article gets a great overview of what our industry is being dealt and kind of faced with in the current state. Lots of information on what the industry-wide atmosphere is looking like, and also how you can circumvent certain risks at your organization. So I suggest everyone, if you haven't been through a strike, it's incredibly challenging, and suggest you all have strike preparedness documents ready, because it's a doozy. Another article here on the national phase out of 3G. So I remember when 3G was like the hot new thing. Now it's really old and it's getting in the way of stuff. This article gives an overview and an action plan for what you need to do in your facility to prepare for the phase out, including a 3-step action plan. A lot more information on this, I'm sure, is going to be coming very soon, but it's something for us to be aware of and work with our IT and biomedical professionals on. And the last industry update article, actually not an article, this was from a call this morning with the hospital emergency managers and the Orange County Healthcare Agency, basically giving us an update and a heads up saying that this new COVID variant BA2, which is the hot new thing in town, is likely to cause a surge in June for Orange County hospitals. What that surge looks like is not known, but reading the tea leaves, what's happening on the East Coast tends to happen here in about a month or two, and they are experiencing a small surge. So we can anticipate to see something very similar in about a month or two. Andrini, I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, thank you, Joe. Hi, guys. Very excited. So hopefully this is our last meeting. If you're joining late, this is going to be our last Zoom meeting unless there's Omicron 2.0 that is coming, right? So we have a lot of exciting things going on, planning for this year. So right now is March. So in April, we're going to have in-person meeting in the brewing in downtown Orange. So if you want to put it on your calendar, April 21st, and it's going to be at 3 p.m. So if you are affiliate, don't forget that to bring door prizes. We'll go back to the door prizes now. So, and then if you know any facility members that not a member yet, it's only $50. You can offer to sponsor them if they will take the sponsorship. So the more the merrier, right? It will be beneficial for you. It will be beneficial for us. But yeah, so, and I know a lot of people not renewing because we're doing Zoom or maybe not, but just keep reminding them to have CSHE membership because we're pushing a lot of that this year. So, and then if you're also interested to talk and have a meeting place or sponsorship, like I'm looking for that because I believe we still can't do meetings inside facility anymore, right, Joe? Like in the hospital?
I think it's just really difficult.
Okay.
But probably coming in the near future, we could get back to it.
Okay.
It's just tricky.
Yeah. But if you have facilities that, I mean, you may be in the MOB and has a conference room, please let me know. I'm looking for, to accommodate like a morning meeting, because if we do it every month in our restaurant, it might be a little difficult to get our group, because in an in-person meeting, we could have like almost 70 people, but we get one next month. So I'm working on the rest of the year. But if you have any suggestion, or maybe if you're affiliate and you have a function room in your office, please let me know if we can use it. I know we can always use ATI conference room. I appreciate that, Tom. So in April, we're gonna have that. In May, maybe we're gonna have a bowling. And June, we're gonna have the golf tournament, June 28th. And we're also going to have the CSHE annual, June 1st to the 3rd in Squaw Creek Valley, right? And then in July, we're gonna have ASHE in Boston. In August, regular meeting, maybe with bowling. If May doesn't happen, so we're gonna have a bowling night. We're planning to have like just a bowling night, not with a meeting, so just a bowling event. You can bring your wife, your kids, so everybody, the more the merrier again. And then in September, we're gonna have a SoCal annual in Long Beach. In October, we're gonna have an Oktoberfest, and then the Christmas party gonna end this year. It's gonna be super fast. So please let everybody know, facility people, put it on your calendar, so again, we can't wait. I can't wait to see all of you guys,
What it sounds like, Andrini, is a really good time to join membership.
Yeah.
Because it's going to be really fun towards the end of the year with a lot of in-person events. And we're really trying to encourage people to join and stay. So if you do know people who are interested, now is a really good time to join, because we're going to hit them real hard with like fun stuff before we get back to the mostly classroom stuff next year.
Yeah. And then if you've been a new member for the last 2 years, I have a pin next month. I have to find the pin, but for the last 2 years, then you'll get a pin finally. Okay, so there's that. And then request for education and trainings. Again, if you are interested on any topics, you let me know and I can find a vendor, or then I can also do the other way. Like if you have any PowerPoint ready for approval, please send it to me. I put my email already on the chat. Please reach out and then we can put you sometime this month and sometime this year in any month. And job opening, just like Joe said, there's an exodus of people leaving, but we also have job openings in many facilities. I know City of Hope in Irvine still looking for a senior manager. If you know anybody that interested on that. And then I know Kaiser is looking some directors for Baldwin Park, and then so if you have any opening, you can also let me know, and then we can always post it, so everybody is aware. And then the more reach out you get, and then the more people, because I know for me, for Costco, it's always hard to find people. So I'm sure everybody else is the same. So I think that's it, Joe. And then golf tournament, it's gonna be superhero team. So if you are affiliate and you're gonna sponsor a hole, please, get your budget ready and then get your ideas ready. And then, of course, it's first come, first serve. So the theme is superhero. So if you want to be Batman, Superman, Supergirl, then that's what, start buying.
I
stuff,
think
because
the
it's gonna be
brochure's
easy.
they're aiming to send it out on Monday. So I know a lot of people have messaged about that. They're finalizing it now, all those details. So if you do want to participate or sponsor, those will be coming out very, very soon.
Yep.
And I think that's about it, right, Andrini?
Yeah, I think that's it. So I'll see you
Alright.
next month in the brewery.
That's right. Next month we have Aquas. They're going to give a presentation on coil cleaning. That's always interesting. And it will be in person, our first in 2 years since I've been president, I think. So it's really exciting. Thanks, everybody. Does anyone have anything that they'd like to go over? Monica, I wanted to bring up, you reached out about ICRA 2.0. It sounds like that might be a good presentation to do for one of our chapter meetings. I know she agrees. So I'll talk with Monica afterwards and talk about infection control risk assessments. Thanks, everybody. Have a great month, and we'll see you all soon at 1886 Brewing next month. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks for your leadership, Joe.